Hello, I'm Rick Anthony, and this is CaregiveraAssist, a series of programs of, by, and for family caregivers, inspired by my own personal experience as a caregiver for my late wife. In the series, we talk to experts at all phases, all aspects of family caregiving, and we talk to family caregivers themselves, who are willing to share their journeys with us in the hope that their experiences will be of help to other people. It's estimated that there are over 53 million family caregivers in this country, up from 43 million 5 years ago. Just over 24 million hold full-time jobs. How they do it, and how many of them fail at trying to do a good job, is the subject of this episode of Caregiver Assist, the plight of employee caregivers. Jane Hamilton is founder and chief content creator for Partners on the Path. I've known Jane for a few years. One of her specialties is consulting with employers about the support that they provide for employee caregivers or don't provide to employee caregivers. Welcome, Jane, to Caregiver Assist. It's nice to see you again after all this time.
Nice to see you, and thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you. You know what we're trying to do here, and that's to impart as much information as possible to people who have gone through what I went through, what you have gone through, and what millions of others are going through now. Mm-hmm. And it's lonely, as you know. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to fill that space. Well, why don't we start with the definition? You're an expert. The definition of a family caregiver.
Well, I think that's a great place to start, because when I started working in this field 30 years ago, when I said caregiver, they thought I was talking about nurses and doctors. Mm-hmm. And so now we have come to a place where people are aware that there is a category of people called family caregivers. These are individuals, they can be any age, any race, any socioeconomic group, people who are any gender, men, women, who take care of their loved ones. And they care for people who are ill, disabled, elderly, or special needs children. And so they care for individuals across the age spectrum, from very small to the very oldest of our old. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they provide 4 types of care. They provide physical care, bathing, dressing, grooming, helping somebody to walk. They provide emotional and social support. They give a phone call or make a visit. They cheer people up, or they calm them down. They listen. They're there. They're present for them. They address personal affairs like paying the bills, shoveling the snow, cleaning the house, buying the groceries, cooking the meals. And finally, they take care of the personal life affairs like medication and transportation and getting somebody to the doctor and care management. So they provide help in a variety of different ways, and they are oftentimes not trained to do this, and mostly are not paid to do this. Yeah. And there are, as you said, over 53 million people in the United States doing this all day.
I should have mentioned that you're a nurse, a psychiatric nurse?
Yes.
Yes. You had a great deal of experience as a professional.
Yes. Consulting
with and counseling with people who... You also are an author.
Yes, I am.
This is the 2nd edition, I think you said.
Yes.
The Caregiver's Guide to Self-Care. It really is a manual for caregivers. It's chock full of information.
Thank you.
And tools that they can use. How do people get a copy of this?
This is newly edited, just came out in fall of 2022, and it's available on Amazon. And I also want to say that this book is not only useful for family caregivers, but it could be used by people who do counseling and coaching to help structure a support group for family caregivers.
Good point. Okay. I learned, as you know, at a point I was doing a lot of research and writing and so on about caregiving for a company that I was involved in. But until you've gone through it yourself, you really don't know what it's like.
Right.
I have heard, though, or rather I read in the research, that at least 15%, and it may be higher now, 15% of every employee population has caregiver responsibilities at home. Mm-hmm. Is that still about the estimate?
Well, it depends on how you look at the concept of caregiving. In a very circumscribed way, that caring for people who are ill, disabled, elderly, or special needs children, it's close to that number. 2022 data tells us it's actually a little higher than that. It's between 18 and 22% of the workforce is caring for a family member who is in physical need or emotional need of support. But then there was another study which was developed and presented in 2019 by the Harvard Business School called The Caring Company.
I remember that one, yeah.
And what they said is that almost 3/4 of the workforce has care responsibilities when they go home at night. They define care responsibilities much more broadly to include parents with childcare responsibilities. Yes. And so people go to work and they offer their energies on behalf of their organization, but when they go home, they have family members for whom they care.
The average, again, poor memory, but the average was 20 hours a week, or minimum 20 hours a week, I shouldn't say average, who are providing some kind of care to a care-dependent adult.
Yes, and what I have understood in terms of the challenges that caregivers experience, it's an average of 24 hours a week, and the average length of a person's tenure as a family caregiver is close to 4.5 years. So that's, it's not a short-term in and out kind of thing. No. 24 hours a week, that's like a part-time job on top of doing whatever I'm doing in my work. And so that 4.5 years, caregiving becomes a chronic source of stress. Yes. And so let me tell you, the impact of that chronic stress on a caregiver is that it takes a toll on physical, emotional, and financial health. The data tell us that the chronic stress of caregiving can lead to minor ailments like GI distress or sore backs or insomnia or headaches, but they can also lead to very serious chronic illnesses, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, cancer, heart disease have been tied.
You haven't mentioned addiction.
Yes, indeed. Addiction can increase when someone self-medicates to deal with the stress of...
53 million people is a lot of folks. But for years, it's been the silent cohort. That's changing gradually. But why is it changing? Why all of a sudden are we paying more attention to family caregivers?
53 million invisible people, essentially. Yeah. And I think the best thing that has come out of the pandemic, awful pandemic, don't get me wrong, but during the pandemic, people's eyes were opened to the challenges of caregiving. Employers saw that their employees had children at home. They were schooling their children because schools were closed. There were no babysitters. Home care for an elderly loved one, for a parent, was closed down because people didn't want them coming into their homes. And so people began to see that the care for loved ones goes on despite how much work I'm doing outside of the home. So we began to open our eyes and see the existence of caregivers amongst us.
As it stands now, what kind of care are employers providing to employee caregivers?
Well, the data that I've seen is that almost 8 in 10 employees have no designated caregiver support offered through their workplace. We're different here in the United States as compared with countries elsewhere in the world. However,
who do more or less?
Do more. Oh, yes.
Oh.
Yes. But there are things available, but not packaged, if you will, and presented as caregiver benefits. There are organizations that have flex time. There are organizations that have wellness programs or employee assistance programs. So there are some things available, but the vast number of people who are employed as employees and caregivers don't recognize that there is something available to support them.
Jane, so far as I know, the kind of assistance that is provided by what's it
EAP?
called? Yeah, EAP, thank you, Employee Assistance Program, is just referring them to other possible resources. There's no hands-on help. Furthermore, based on what I think I know, and I've talked to HR directors about this as well, most of them seem to think that just giving caregivers more time, it solves the problem. It relieves them of any responsibility that they feel they have. And we both know time isn't enough. It helps, but it's not nearly enough.
Well, I think when I think about EAPs, one of the pieces of data that I'm familiar with is that they're only used 10% of the time. So 90% of employees don't ever go to the EAP.
Because of the stigma.
Stigma and question about the value. And I think your point applies here, that until you've had the experience of being a caregiver, I think the depth of it, the intensity with which it affects my life is not understood. And I think, fair enough, the EAP offers references and referrals to places, and that's appropriate. But I think in order to really address the needs of caregivers, an organization or a provider would need to look in depth at what actually they need. And caregivers need a variety of different things. Some of it is information, some of it is referrals and advice, but some of it is, as you knew from your own personal experience, a need for reliable, high-quality, hands-on help. And so every caregiver, there's a famous saying, if you've seen one caregiver, you've seen one caregiver. And when I say that, I think about the fact that each of us has our own unique set of needs. And caregiving is a universal experience. Rosalind Carter has a very famous quote that is used in a lot of different ways, but her quote is that there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who currently are caregivers, those who have been caregivers, those who will be caregivers, or those who will need caregivers. And the universality of it for us as individuals is that all of our lives will be touched by caregiving at some point in time. But the point that I want to get to with you've seen one caregiver, you've seen one caregiver, while there is universality in caregiving as an experience, how I experience it, how you experience it is unique and uniquely personal. What you need, what you feel, how the situation comes on you, how long it lasts, what kinds of resources you will require. It's unique to you and to your caregiver, care receiver, excuse me.
However, I feel, I have no data to support this, that what is common to all of us as caregivers is the loneliness.
Oh, yes.
The feeling of isolation and vulnerability, because I know I don't know everything I should know. And I've mentioned this before, particularly in medication management, the responsibility of getting the pills out 3 times a day and making sure it's the right pills, the right doses, knowing
at the right time,
knowing that if you make a mistake, it could be a serious mistake with serious consequences. That's scary. At least it was for me.
Well, I think the majority of caregivers haven't gone to nursing school or medical school, and so make it up as they go and learn as they go. And one of the big needs of caregivers is to have access to reliable advice on how to fulfill the role. But as you say, another huge need is to recognize and respond to our own feelings as we go through that caregiver journey.
You need a coach. You do. You need a coach to get you through it.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned to you before, I interviewed someone from Surrey Academy, a service offered by Surrey Services, to teach family caregivers, both unpaid and paid, professional. And she told me that the dropout rate, or people who would love to do it, but they can't afford the time to give to just devoting time to learning how to be a caregiver.
And so they learn on the fly?
Yeah, they improvise.
Yes.
And hope.
Yes, keep their fingers crossed. Yeah.
Recognizing that in some, not all cases, next year is going to be pretty much the same as this year. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I think you're touching on one aspect of caregiving that I think causes it to be so challenging. The technical, clinical, scientific aspects of it are hard, but I think there's an underlying, and this is where my psychiatric nursing thing comes in, there's an underlying sense of loss and change, which is very profound. When my husband was ill, when my mother was not well, there was a sense within me that who they were was being challenged. What my mother was able to do is being lost to me. And so there is a sense of grief that comes with that change. And it makes the experience not only challenging technically, but challenging emotionally as well.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Again, the focus today is on employers.
We could talk about the caregiver for a long time.
Yeah, we could. Yeah. And just swap stories.
Yes.
But employers, I mean, I'm amazed. I mean, I've been in HR, I've known a lot of people in HR, and I'm still amazed that, and we interviewed a lot of HR people as part of a project I was involved in. They want to do something, but they're not sure what, and they're not sure they're going to get the support of senior management if it means more money, more time off, and being what might be perceived as discriminating in favor of a group of people, no matter how large that group may be in a large employee population. It still amazes me that HR people haven't stepped up to a problem that is going to reach, if it hasn't already, crisis level in this country. Just not enough caregivers for an aging population.
Well, that is actually very true. As the population ages, the demographics in the United States are such, and around the world actually, that with an aging population, we need to be able to provide more support to them. Our aged population needs more support than the younger folks. The caregivers that need to step up are anybody in the workforce. It could be baby boomers who are caring for their still aged parents and ailing spouses. It can be Gen Xers or millennials who are taking care of their parents or caring for their loved ones, their children, while they're caring for their parents. It could be the Gen Zs who are just coming along, thinking about having children and recognizing that their parents are aging. So anybody in the workforce can be thinking about or actively engaged in caregiving. And when employers think about providing support to their caregiving employees, sometimes there's a little blowback, if you will, from people who say, they're the ones who wanted to have children, so, let them do this. Or, how come I have to pick up the slack for them? And I think as employers look at supporting caregivers, it's important to think about their whole workforce, to create a culture of care within the workforce where we recognize that all of us have value, all of us have needs, all of us have personal lives, and let's figure out how to address everyone's needs within this workforce.
That's a tall order.
Well, it is.
That's a tall order. Yeah. It's relatively easy to just give someone more paid time off to take care, but it's never enough. Mm-hmm. But as a consultant to an employee, let's assume I have 100 employees. And according to the stats, I have 15 family caregiving employees who are taking time off, and they're always asking for more time off because there's always a crisis or something. And I'm not talking about child care, I'm talking about dependent adult care. What counsel, what advice, what recommendations would you make to me how best to accommodate the 15 or so employees I have? And I have an answer in mind. I want to see if you're going to come
Okay, well, this is a test, huh? Really? Okay. Well, I think first of all, and when I was thinking about coming to talk with you, I thought, what advice would I give to employers? And one of the things that I would advise is, first of all, to talk with people, to do an assessment of caregivers in your organization.
You passed the test.
Oh, good. Hallelujah. So the first thing to do is, if you have an employee survey, start to put some questions about caregiving on there. There's actually some guidance available on the internet from a variety of organizations. One of them is AARP, on assessing your caregiving employees. Mm-hmm. So if you start with some dialogue about what are the things that you're experiencing in your life and what would be helpful to you, it's important, I think, for employers to know that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to caregiver support.
But how do you deal with the reticence on the part of employee caregivers who don't want their supervisors, their employers to know, for fear they're going to be stigmatized?
Okay, well, that brings me to point number two, which is to create a sort of a caregiver-friendly culture. And what do I mean when I say that? A culture in which people feel safe to be who they are. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that have been written about this, and again, there's some really fine material available online about creating a caregiver-friendly culture. Mm-hmm. First and foremost is to have managers and senior people within the organization talk about their own caregiving experience, to be able to be vulnerable and honest about what their experience is will give an indirect message, if nothing else.
Well, that's an excellent point, because as we were interviewing people for this project I told you, invariably they themselves were involved in some caregiving, or their spouse was, distance caregiving, or they knew somebody who was involved in caregiving. So that's an excellent point.
Well, and I think that as I said, the pandemic has really opened people's eyes to this. And so to continue on with that growing awareness, leaders in the organization can talk about that. I think on a supervisor level, it's important to let your employees use the benefits that are available to them without feeling that they have to hide or pay a price for it. I think also in terms of raising awareness, a no-cost thing that an employer can do is to pay attention in November, which is National Family Caregivers Month, and to raise that topic during that time and honor the people who are caregivers. I think another thing that is sort of a no-cost but pretty highly visible strategy would be to create an employee resource group or an affinity group
Right.
so that caregivers
Yeah.
could come together and talk with one another
Yeah.
and help each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All sounds good.
There's another idea that I would offer, and that is the idea of creating, making available, I should say, the valuable resources that will help caregivers to do the job of caregiving. Some of it is an emotional process, but some of it is work. It's tasks, and there are tasks I need to know how to do.
Yes.
So one of the things that employers can do is to provide access to three kinds of resources. One, I would say, are digital or online resources. One of the things that I've done in my companies, in Partners on the Path, I've developed self-care resources to teach caregivers how to practice self-care while they're caring for others and the importance of that. In my other company, which is called Help4Caregivers, I've developed a digital directory of resources where people can go online and search for information, referrals, advice. And there is a tremendous amount of information out there. 95% of us search online for information,
Yes.
but we don't want to just do a random internet search because we're not sure about the quality of what's presented there.
So have you curated?
Excuse me. Yes. As a nurse, as someone who's been a caregiver myself, I've been able to curate what's out there and give people references to those resources. But in addition to the digital resources that are available, there's a second set of resources, which are community-based resources, things that are available in your city or your town. These are things like Meals on Wheels, or for transportation, Lyft or Uber. There is the Area Agency on Aging, which provides adult day services. There are in-home home care organizations that provide either high-level medical home care or companion care. So there are any number of resources available, and employers can make those contacts available, and that doesn't cost any money. And then the third thing that I would alert employers to are the existing organizational resources that they can perhaps repackage, if you will. So the data says that about 80% of employees don't have access to a designated caregiver support program in the workplace. But there are things that are offered already, and employers can take those and highlight the flexible work arrangements. They can highlight the connections to a wellness program or a financial assistance program to help caregivers.
That's quite a litany.
There are a lot of things that they can do.
Okay. Against that, you mentioned earlier that other countries do, or employers, I assume you meant employers in other countries do a better job of supporting their family caregivers. Is that because, or is it particularly true in those countries where they have socialized medicine? It is.
There is an international interest in supporting caregivers in countries other than the United States. They're called carers instead of caregivers, C-A-R-E-R. So in the United Kingdom, there are carers, and their national health system does things to support caregivers. And so there are national initiatives around the world.
Which takes the responsibility off the employer?
Well,
and puts it on government?
I don't know that I can really speak to that particularly because I haven't studied that. But I think that employers, in conjunction with the national health system, support caregivers. Yeah. And, you know, in the United States, there has been some growing awareness. I've been at this, as I said, since the 1980s. And starting back in 2000, there were there was a national caregiver program initiated by the federal government. Then there was a respite program 6 years later that was developed by the federal government. The Veteran Association has developed the National Veteran Caregiver Training Program, which is, I was a trainer for them. I used to train the caregivers whose spouses were veterans dealing with physical and psychological issues. And now the last thing I will say is at the end of 2022, the United States started a new affiliation, and let me refer to this so that I get the name of it actually.
You have to hurry up.
Correct. We're out of time. The National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers. Hundreds of things done nationally and locally.
That's online, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. We're over.
We're out of time.
And we didn't cover all that I had hoped we'd cover, but we covered a good bit. Thank you so much, Jane, for being here. My guest has been Jane Hamilton.
My pleasure.
Who is an author, a consultant, and a whole bunch of other things. Until next time, I'm Rick Anthony. This is Caregiver Assist. Take very good care of yourselves.